hey, I'm going to run a background check. Is there anything I need to be aware of? And they say, well, my credit's not in great shape because I was a victim of identity theft. But it's becoming a pretty reasonable excuse to say, hey, I've got bad credit, and here's the reason why.
Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, pretty good, Jeff. So topic we're covering today, once again, comes from a conversation that we've had with landlords. This is actually a really, really common one. And I think landlords who do background checks would admit that they run into it pretty often. So let me paint the scenario for you here. Applicant comes to you, gives you their application. You say, hey, I'm going to run a background check. Is there anything I need to be aware of? It's going to include looking at your finances, criminal records, evictions, etc. And they say, well, my credit's not in great shape because I was a victim of identity theft. And that's sort of a catch-all, and certainly popular in today. And it is frequent. It does happen a lot. But I think it's also, because it's so frequent, it's becoming a pretty reasonable excuse to say, hey, I've got bad credit, and here's the reason why. And it takes a little bit of that load off of them. I don't know anybody that says, hey, I've got bad credit because I was terrible at paying my bills, and, and so just to let you know. So there's usually a reason that goes along with it. So, we get a lot of calls from landlords that say, hey, this person said that they were a victim of identity theft. Is there any way that I can tell? Or is there any way that I can know? And there is no database that says this person was a victim of identity theft. I think that would be counterintuitive of identity theft to then compile everybody and list them. But if you're looking at their credit reports specifically, or pulling their credit information, the credit reports will indicate that identity theft was an issue in the past for them. And anybody who's been through identity theft knows there is a very specific set of procedures that you have to go through and you have to follow in order to correct the problem. So we'll kind of go over some of that, and I'll tell you what, as a landlord, you need to be looking for. So let's first kind of roll through the issue from the perspective of somebody that had their identity stolen. So Jeff, if you had your identity stolen and you figured this out because you got a bill in the mail, or let's say you pulled your credit report and you saw a credit card on there that wasn't yours, and it obviously raised a concern. And so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to probably contact the creditor, whoever it is, or the credit agency, or the credit bureau. The first thing they're going to tell you to do is get a police report, always, in every case.
Okay.
So the police report is such a necessary part of the equation. Right away, if somebody's claiming that they've been a victim of identity theft, the very first thing you can ask them is, do you have a police report that supports that claim? If they don't, then they haven't been truly a victim of identity theft, or it hasn't been addressed appropriately, because you have to have that piece of it in order to properly dispute these items within your credit report. And the credit bureaus want to see that information as well and make sure that you've taken the right steps. Obviously, they don't want people to, there has to be some sort of safeguard that somebody's just going to say, well, wait a minute, I didn't walk into JCPenney's and open a card. That wasn't me. By getting the police report, you're adding some validity to that.
Right.
You're eliminating, or at least reducing, the possibility that you can just wildly make up these things and have these things removed and erased from your history. So that being an important part of it, once the credit bureaus are made aware that you've begun the process and you're taking the steps to dispute the information, they put what's called a credit freeze on your credit report. And those are visible to people like us who are doing the background checks and viewing somebody's credit report. We can see on there's been a credit freeze, or there's currently a credit freeze. And anybody who's ever had a credit freeze knows it's not an easy thing to get on, and it's not an easy thing really to take off. Not easy in the sense that, I'm not painting the picture like after you request to have it come off, it's going to be a pain to have it come off. But in order to get it off, there's a very specific set of steps. They give you a special PIN number that only you have, and you've got to give it to them. So there's a very secure set of procedures in place that deal with identity theft. So again, somebody who claims that they're a victim of it, if all of these things are not present, then it's pretty safe to say they have not truly been a victim of identity theft.
And whether or not they have been a victim of identity theft, so let's say they were a victim of identity theft, but they never contacted the police or the credit agencies or followed these procedures. So you don't have to tell them you weren't a victim. What you can tell them is the process that should have been followed, which would give me an opportunity to properly evaluate your credit history, those processes haven't been followed. And as a result, I can't just take your word on the fact that you were a victim of identity theft.
Yeah, great point. I mean, if none of those indicators are there, then there's no evidence. There's
Right.
nothing for me to base that on. So I agree. That's a great way to say, hey, you didn't do it correctly, and these things weren't followed, and so, I can't accept the application at this time.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's and like I said, I mean, anybody who's ever been a victim, it's a nightmare. Yeah, I've heard firsthand stories. I personally have never been a victim of identity theft. I have a very common name, so I'm kind of surprised. But I'm very vigilant. I'm always checking. I think most people know at this point, it's always a good idea to pull your credit report at least twice a year,
Yes.
see what's on there. Make sure that if there's anything on there that needs to be disputed, because there's very often mistakes on there. I went years with not having my mortgage reported to the credit bureau at all. Not even like, and
Wow.
I had never been late or anything, and it just wasn't on there. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm doing everything right. I want it on there. I want the benefits of the credit that can build, obviously. So there's things that, even if you're not a victim of identity theft, or if that's that shouldn't be the sole purpose of you looking at it, but just to stay on top of it. And anybody who's concerned about their personal finance, obviously, I think does this. But if something does arise, and you say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't me, again, follow the steps to properly dispute it, take the right actions, and in the end, it will all work out for you. You will be able to have that stuff removed. The credit freeze will help fix your credit file. They'll get everything on there that should be yours. They'll work with you. They have whole departments dedicated specifically to that. I think identity theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, and certainly from the credit perspective and creditors perspective, it's one of the fastest growing departments that they have too, because they're constantly having to manage it and deal with it. So they have procedures and things set in place to help you get through it. And same thing, with your applicants. If they're genuinely a victim of it, they should have gone through and followed all the steps to protect themselves, so that it's not going to be something that wrongfully damages them, which it obviously has the ability to do.
Right. So if a tenant runs across an applicant who says, I've been a victim of identity theft, it would make sense to ask them for a copy of the police report. That's a good starting point.
Yeah, I would say so. And like I said, it's never a bad idea. Call the background check company, ask questions. Depending on what type of background checks you're running, you may not actually see the credit report. So it may not be something that you can actually see yourself.
Hmm.
So a lot of times, if you call the background check company and they're interpreting it, they can do that for you. We certainly do it here. And again, those things are going to appear and leave a trail of evidence saying, yeah, this has happened to the person in the past, and either they're still going through it, and that's why you see what you see, or that's why they're not scored, or they have a really low score, or yeah, it happened in the past, and now their credit is based on the merits of their own credit activities. So the identity theft was 5 years ago. It's no longer an issue, because that's another thing too.
Right.
At what point do you stop using that as an excuse to have bad credit? So, I think and again, because identity theft is so prevalent and so popular, and such an issue, that I think a lot of times it becomes sort of an excuse to continue to let your credit decline. I've seen that my share of times too.
Well, great, Stephen. That really helps a lot. Hopefully people are able to take that and apply it when they get applicants who claim to have been the victims of identity theft.
Absolutely.
So we'll look forward to talking with you again tomorrow evening.
All right, great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.